In the midst of the constant hustle and bustle of New York City, Emily, a 30-year-old black woman, stood by the window of her apartment, gazing out at the city's skyline. The lights from the towering skyscrapers reflected in the night, creating a scene that never failed to captivate her. For the past year, Emily had been planning the dream trip she and her husband, James, a 32-year-old black interior designer, had always wanted to take. They were a well-matched pair, complementing each other both in their personal and professional lives. Emily was a talented architect working for a prestigious firm in New York. She had been involved in numerous high-profile projects in the city, designing modern commercial buildings and public spaces that significantly shaped the urban landscape. Her job was challenging, with tight deadlines and high expectations from big clients. Emily's dedication and creativity in her work had earned her recognition as one of the city's most promising young architects, but the pressure of her job often drained her energy and time. James had an equally demanding career. As an interior designer, he worked with a wide range of clients, from private homes to larger commercial projects. His role went beyond aesthetics. He aimed to design spaces that reflected the personalities of the people who lived in them. Often collaborating with architects, including Emily on occasion, they had developed a deep understanding of each other's work.
Before you continue with this video, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm from Texas, USA. How about you? Let me know in the comments.
For Emily, this dream trip to Europe was more than just a temporary escape. It was the culmination of years of hard work and dedication, a chance for them to recharge, strengthen their bond, and immerse themselves in different cultures. Together, they envisioned making this trip a special memory to cherish for a lifetime. They imagined strolling through the ancient streets of Rome, admiring classical architecture, savoring local food in small restaurants, and watching the sunset over the Seine in Paris. The past year had been full of sacrifices. Emily and James had to budget carefully for every expense, cutting back on their lifestyle to make this long-term dream a reality. Emily even reduced her work hours to focus more on planning, while James took on extra freelance gigs to boost their income. Although tough, these challenges only brought them closer. Every obstacle they faced together deepened their commitment, and now, their big dream of exploring the world was within reach. That day, everything felt perfect. They had their plane tickets, hotel reservations, and a carefully planned itinerary. Emily had even printed out all the important documents and stored them neatly in a special folder. During her spare moments, she imagined the trip, taking in the beauty of the Eiffel Tower, marveling at the grandeur of the Colosseum, and smiling as she felt the refreshing European breeze. Emily and James sat at their dining table, surrounded by travel guides and little notes filled with brilliant ideas. Outside the window, the morning sunlight bathed the city, filling them with warmth and excitement. This was the day they had been waiting for, the day they would finally start planning their dream vacation to Europe. Eager to begin, Emily opened the conversation with a wide smile. "How about we start with Paris?" she asked excitedly, her eyes sparkling like a child on Christmas morning. "I've read so much about the Eiffel Tower, especially how beautiful it is at night when all the lights come on." James smiled back, leaning into his chair and gazing at Emily with affection. "Yeah, I'd love to walk along the Seine. Picture us sitting at a cafe, sipping hot coffee while the world passes by," he said, his voice soft and hopeful, as if he could already feel the Parisian atmosphere, the cool breeze, the smell of coffee, and the lively yet peaceful cafe vibe. Without further delay, they began listing the places they wanted to visit. From famous museums like the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay to hidden little restaurants tucked away in the city's corners, every spot in their plan held special meaning. For them, Paris wasn't just a tourist destination, it was a place to create new memories they'd carry with them for life. These moments weren't just about the vacation, but about weaving dreams together, something they had always wanted in their journey of love. "And after Paris, we can head to Rome," Emily added with just as much enthusiasm. "I can't wait to taste real pasta there." Her eyes lit up, imagining the famous Italian cuisine. James chuckled, his broad smile still in place. "And of course we have to try gelato every day. There's no way we're going to Italy without sampling authentic gelato on every corner," he said, his voice full of excitement. "And we must visit the Colosseum. Just imagine taking a picture in front of that historic monument." Every idea they shared only added to their excitement, as if they could already feel the romance of the ancient buildings and cobbled streets, rich with stories from the past. With each new place they added to the list, the air around them buzzed with hope and happiness. This plan, this long-awaited journey, felt like a symbol of everything they had achieved together. They cheered each other on, shared laughter, and dug up ideas that brought them even closer. Every small discussion about the cities they wanted to visit felt like a step closer to the adventure that would strengthen their bond. "If we have time, We should also go to Amsterdam, Emily said again, her eyes glowing. I've always dreamed of cycling along the canals, enjoying the peaceful, beautiful city. James nodded in agreement. Yes, and of course we must visit the Van Gogh Museum. It would be amazing to see those legendary works of art in their original home. He carefully noted all their ideas on his laptop. I really feel like this vacation will be something extraordinary for us, he added, as if reassuring himself that it would all soon become a reality. With every plan they made, their love and connection deepened. Emily felt so grateful to have James by her side, someone who always supported her dreams without hesitation. She knew this trip wasn't just about exploring new places, but also about celebrating their strong, supportive, and loving relationship. However, as night began to fall, and they sat on the couch, gazing at the map of Europe spread before them, a shadow of doubt crept into Emily's mind. Despite all the joy and excitement of planning this trip, Emily couldn't shake the growing anxiety gnawing at her. A long-standing family issue that had been bothering her began to resurface, like a shadow she couldn't escape. She tried to push it aside, but the more they planned, the stronger the conflict grew between her desire for adventure and the responsibilities she faced back home. James, unaware of Emily's concerns, continued talking about other destinations they wanted to visit, his enthusiasm undimmed. I think we could also spend a few days in Barcelona. I've heard the architecture is amazing, and the seafood is supposed to be incredible, he said, still glued to his laptop screen, full of excitement. Emily gave a small smile, but deep down she knew there were many things to consider before this trip could become a reality. Yet she was determined to enjoy every moment of this process with James. Mark didn't give up easily. His voice became more desperate and strained. Emily, I know this is sudden, but I have no other choice. I don't have insurance, and I can't afford these expenses on my own. Please think about my family. Are you really going to let me suffer like this? The desperation and sadness in his voice tugged at Emily's heart, deepening her moral dilemma. Emily bowed her head, taking a deep breath as she closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard. She knew Mark had a habit of making poor financial decisions, and this situation wasn't entirely surprising. However, her instinct as an older sister, wanting to protect her brother, made it difficult to simply ignore his plea. Mark, this isn't about whether I love you or not. I've always wanted to help you, but it's about everything we've planned. James and I have been saving for this trip for years. You have to find another way to deal with this. Emily tried to keep her voice calm, even though she felt the pressure inside. On the other end of the phone, Mark was silent for a moment. Emily could feel the tension building between them. But this is my life, Emily. If I don't get help soon, my condition could get worse. Are you really willing to take that risk? Mark's voice was filled with urgency, and Emily could sense her brother's fear and helplessness. Emily felt the weight on her heart grow heavier. She knew Mark had a point, but she also knew she couldn't just toss aside the dreams and plans she and James had built together. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, Emily softly said, I need some time to think about this, Mark. Let me talk to James first. She hung up the phone, her heart heavy. After the conversation ended, Emily was left feeling confused and distressed. She stared at the travel documents in front of her, her emotions swirling. All the excitement about the trip they had planned now seemed so distant. Slowly, she walked to the living room, where James was still immersed in studying their travel maps. With a sense of anxiety, Emily approached James and sat beside him. James, I just got a call from Mark, she said, her voice trembling slightly. James put down the map and looked at her with concern. He says he needs emergency surgery for a tooth infection, and it costs $10,000. James's face immediately shifted, his expression becoming serious. $10,000? That's a lot. Doesn't he have insurance? Emily shook her head, trying to suppress the guilt welling up inside. No, he doesn't. He's always making poor financial choices, and now he's hoping I can help. I feel so stuck, James. I don't want to cancel this trip, but he's my brother. James looked at Emily, trying to understand the situation more clearly. Emily, I get that this is a tough decision. You love your family, and I respect that. But we've also been saving and planning for this for so long. You deserve to chase your own happiness too, he said gently. Emily's eyes began to fill with tears. I don't know what to do, James. I don't want to leave my brother in trouble, but I also can't just destroy our dream, she said, her voice full of despair. James took a deep breath and gently held Emily's hand. We'll figure this out together, Emily. Whatever you decide, I'll support you, he said understandingly. James's words brought Emily a small sense of comfort, though the doubts and the dilemma still weighed heavily on her mind. But as night fell and their home grew quiet, the uncertainty within Emily only grew. She gazed up at the stars, as if searching for answers among the distant lights. She knew that whatever decision she made wouldn't be easy, and there would be consequences no matter what. In the silence of the night, Emily asked herself, was she ready to sacrifice everything they had dreamed of to help her brother? Or would she choose to pursue the happiness she and James had built together? That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind raced, endlessly turning over the possibilities and consequences of her decision. She lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, while the ticking of the clock filled the quiet room. The sound felt like a reminder of time passing, urging her to make a decision. But her thoughts were too tangled to find a clear answer. Part of her felt deeply sorry for Mark. She knew her brother often got into financial trouble because of poor decisions. Emily had helped him before, but this time it felt different. The stakes were higher, more urgent. But on the other hand, Emily felt angry and frustrated. Mark always relied on others when he was in trouble, and this time, Emily couldn't let her brother's mistakes cost her the dream she had built with James. By morning, Emily woke up feeling exhausted, but with a growing resolve in her heart. She couldn't stay trapped in this indecision any longer. After making a cup of coffee, Emily sat down with James for a conversation. They sat at the kitchen table, a place usually filled with excited talk about their trip. But today, the mood was heavy. The travel guides and maps scattered across the table served as a reminder of all the hopes they had built. "James, I'm still feeling torn," Emily said softly. "I want to help Mark, but I also don't want to give everything up. This trip is my dream." James nodded, showing that he understood. "I can see how hard this is for you. But remember, this decision isn't just about Mark, it's about your happiness too," he said gently. Emily sighed deeply, feeling the weight on her heart grow heavier. "I feel selfish. What if he really needs me? Am I going to let him suffer just because I want to go on vacation?" "Emily, you're not selfish," James said, looking at her softly. "You've done your best to help him over the years. But you also have the right to pursue your own happiness. Mark is your brother, but you can't sacrifice your own life every time he's in trouble." After a long discussion, Emily knew there was no easy answer to this situation. Finally, she decided to call Mark. She had to give him a firm answer, even though her heart still felt heavy. As the phone rang, her heart pounded. After a few moments, Mark's anxious voice answered. "Emily, how are you?" "Have you thought about what I said?" Mark asked, his voice full of worry. Emily took a deep breath, preparing herself to respond. "Mark, I've thought about everything. I want to help you, but I can't cancel this trip," she said, trying to stay firm despite the uncertainty in her heart. "I can't believe this. Are you really going to leave me alone in this situation?" Mark sounded furious, and Emily felt the sting of his words. "I need you, Emily. Is this trip really more important than your family?" "Mark, I know this is hard for you, but I have my own life too. I can't always sacrifice everything for you. I've supported you so far, but this time I have to choose my own dream," Emily replied, her voice beginning to tremble. "So you're choosing a vacation over your family?" Mark snapped, his voice full of anger and disappointment. "This isn't about choosing between family or a vacation. I love you, Mark, but I also have to love myself. I can't keep living my life putting off my own happiness because of responsibilities that aren't mine to bear," Emily said, her voice breaking slightly. Mark was silent for a moment, then without another word, he hung up. Emily felt a strange sense of relief, followed by a deep guilt. She knew this was the right decision for her, but the weight of that guilt still lingered in her heart. James, who had been sitting nearby, came over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "How did it go?" he asked gently. "He's angry. I think I've let him down," Emily replied, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't know if I can live with this decision." James stepped closer, hugging Emily tightly. "You did your best, Emily. You have to remember that sometimes we have to make tough choices to protect ourselves." Though James tried to comfort her, Emily knew deep down that this guilt wouldn't fade easily. The feeling of betraying her brother still haunted her thoughts. Days passed, filled with the anxiety of their upcoming trip. Every time she tried to focus on preparing for the vacation, her mind would drift back to Mark, making her feel unworthy of the happiness she was pursuing. As the departure date approached, Emily remained caught between two worlds. On one side, there was the joy and hope of the future she and James had planned. On the other, there was the looming sense of family responsibility, leaving her feeling guilty for the happiness she was trying to claim. The night before their departure, Emily sat alone in the living room, staring at the travel map spread out on the table. She tried to convince herself that the decision she had made was the right one, but lingering doubts continued to haunt her. Had she really made the right choice? Could she find peace with her decision? As James joined her, sitting quietly by her side, Emily realized that despite the heavy burden she carried, she had someone next to her who was ready to support her unconditionally. Even though the inner conflict remained, she knew that the journey they were about to embark on together was a first step toward healing her heart and soul. The days leading up to their departure were fast approaching, and Emily struggled not to let the emotional weight of her conflict with Mark overshadow her. Yet, every time she saw the plane tickets or thought about their vacation plans, the guilt crept back in. It felt as though the joy of the carefully planned holiday had been tainted by her family troubles. One afternoon, while Emily and James were packing for their trip to Europe, her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Mark appeared on the screen. "I need to talk," it read simply. Emily felt a heaviness in her chest, her curiosity clashing with fear. "James, Mark wants to talk." "I don't feel good about this," Emily said, her voice trembling. James paused what he was doing and looked at her with concern. "Do you want to reply? It could be a chance to resolve things," he suggested. Emily nodded slowly, then opened the messaging app and began to type. "I'm busy with preparations. Is it something urgent?" She sent the message, trying to sound firm, even though her heart was racing. While waiting for a reply, they continued packing. Emily tried to push thoughts of Mark aside, but after a few minutes, a response arrived. "It's important. I need you here," Mark wrote. Emily felt torn. She didn't want to deal with more drama, but her love for her brother was hard to ignore. "James, what should I do?" she asked, confusion creeping in. "If you feel like you need to, you can meet him. But remember, you're not responsible for solving all his problems," James said, offering a balanced perspective. After a moment of thought, Emily nodded. "All right, I'll go see him," she decided, though doubt lingered in her mind. She grabbed her car keys and drove to Mark's house, her emotions swirling. When she finally arrived, she could feel the tension in the air. Mark opened the door, his expression tight. "Thanks for coming, Emily," he said, his tone softer than usual. "Let's talk," Emily replied, trying to stay calm. They sat in the living room, and the tension between them was palpable. "I don't want us to fight. Family should support each other," Mark said, his face full of hope, though there was still a hint of unresolved anger in his voice. "I know, but I also have to think about myself. I can't cancel this vacation. It's something we've been planning for a year," Emily explained gently. "I'm struggling here." "You don't understand how hard this is for me," Mark responded, frustration creeping into his voice. Emily felt trapped, torn between wanting to comfort her brother and the need to stand by her own decision. "Mark, I care about you, but I also need my own life. I can't always be the one to save you," she said, feeling the pressure building inside her. "I just want you to be there for me," Mark said, his tone softening slightly. Emily looked into his eyes, sensing his deep pain and helplessness. She wanted to offer support, but the emotional weight was overwhelming. "I'll always be here for you, but I can't sacrifice my happiness," she replied, trying to stay firm. After talking for a while, Emily realized the situation wasn't improving. Mark still seemed disappointed, and the tension grew thicker. Unbeknownst to her, tears began to fall down her cheeks. "I don't want us to end up like this," she said quietly, her voice reflecting the sadness she felt. "I don't either," Emily, Mark said, sounding more defeated. "I just feel so alone and confused." They agreed to stop arguing, but Emily knew that she couldn't force Mark to see things from her perspective, and Mark felt equally misunderstood. As Emily left the house, she felt a deep ache in her heart. When she returned home, James was waiting anxiously. "How did it go?" he asked gently. "Nothing's changed. We're still in the same place. Mark feels stuck, and I feel guilty," Emily replied with a deep sigh. James wrapped his arms around her, trying to offer comfort. "You did your best. You can't fix someone's problems if they aren't willing to work on them," he said. But inside, Emily's turmoil continued. She knew this wasn't the end, and her guilt would keep haunting her. Meanwhile, the idea of a perfect vacation felt more and more distant. She sensed that the emotional storm within her family hadn't yet passed, and she had to be ready for whatever came next. That night, Emily lay in bed, but sleep was elusive. Her mind replayed the conversation with Mark over and over. Even though she tried to reassure herself that she had done her best, the guilt clung to her. She felt as though she was being forced to choose between her family and her own happiness, and that choice was weighing heavily on her. Sensing Emily's emotional turmoil, James tried to offer his support. "Do you want to talk more about what happened?" he asked softly, holding her from behind. "I don't know, James. It's just hard to see Mark like that. He can't seem to understand how important this trip is to us," Emily replied quietly, closing her eyes, hoping to escape the burden of her thoughts. "Sometimes people just need time to understand things." "He might feel threatened by our plans," James said gently. "But you deserve to be happy too. Don't let the guilt take over." Emily tried to absorb James's words. She knew that their relationship was one of the best things in her life. She felt warmth and comfort being near him, but the guilt still clouded her happiness. "James, I just don't want all of this to ruin us. This trip is something we've dreamed of, but I also want to support Mark," she said, her voice shaking. James turned Emily to face him, holding her face gently. "Emily, our relationship won't fall apart just because you're trying to balance your family and your dreams. What matters most is communication. I'm here for you, and I'll support whatever decision you make." Emily was moved by James's words. She smiled softly, even though her heart was still filled with doubt. "Thank you, James. You always know how to make me feel better," she said, feeling the warmth of his love. That night, Emily and James shared sweet moments, reminiscing about the early days of their relationship. They talked about their dreams and future plans, with James enthusiastically describing their adventures in Europe. Emily felt inspired by his excitement, imagining them strolling through the streets of Paris, tasting local food, and enjoying small, joyful moments. But even as they exchanged stories, Emily couldn't shake thoughts of Mark. What if he continued to feel isolated? What if this issue lingered and affected their relationship? She felt the pressure building, as if she were responsible for solving all the problems around her. Emily, James broke the silence. "If something's bothering you, just say it. We can work through it together. Sometimes I just feel stuck between what people expect of me and what I want for myself," Emily said, her voice heavy with despair. James pulled her closer. "Remember, you're not in this alone. We're a team and we'll face everything together. When we go to Europe, let's make it a time to celebrate us. Focus on the love and happiness we have." Emily felt comforted by James's words. She nodded, trying to reassure herself that they would get through everything together. She closed her eyes, imagining a brighter future. But as the night wore on, her worries crept back in. She knew that their trip to Europe might bring new tensions. Would Mark continue to disrupt their plans with his issues? And if so, how could they enjoy the vacation they had planned for so long? These fears kept her awake, even as James's embrace provided much-needed comfort. She hoped she could find a way to navigate all the tension, both in her relationship with Mark and in her life with James. Despite all the mixed emotions, Emily was determined to face whatever lay ahead. She knew this journey would mark a turning point in her life, not just in terms of adventure, but also in understanding herself and the relationships she cherished. As the days passed, Emily began to feel excitement for her upcoming vacation to Europe. Each night she and James planned the trip in detail, discussing the places they wanted to visit and the foods they couldn't wait to try. Their shared joy brought a sense of lightness to their relationship, washing away the burden she had been feeling. But everything changed one afternoon as Emily relaxed on the couch, waiting for James to return from work. She was scrolling through a map of Europe, imagining the two of them standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, when her phone rang. The unfamiliar number on the screen didn't give her pause, she answered, expecting good news from a friend or colleague. But the voice on the other end made her heart sink. "Emily, it's Mark." Her brother's voice sounded tense and anxious. "Mark? Is something wrong?" Emily asked, her pulse quickening. "I need to talk to you." "It's urgent," Mark replied, his tone unsettling. Taking a deep breath, Emily tried to calm herself. "Okay, tell me, what's going on?" "It's about my surgery. I can't get a loan from anyone, and I need your help. Now." "It's really important," Mark said, his voice pleading. Emily felt her body tense. She had anticipated this, the return of Mark asking for help after their last disagreement. "Mark, I already told you I can't cancel this vacation. James and I have been planning this for a year. Don't be selfish, Emily. This isn't about you. It's about my life. If I don't get this surgery, the infection could get worse." Mark's voice rose in frustration. Frustration and anxiety welled up in Emily. "Mark, I understand you're in a tough spot, but I can't sacrifice everything. I have my own life and dreams to fulfill," she tried to explain, though her voice was already breaking. "I'm going to tell Mom about this. She'll support me, and you know how much she cares about me," Mark threatened. That sentence hit Emily hard. Their mother had always been firmly supportive of Mark, and Emily didn't want to get caught in the middle of their conflict. "Mark, don't threaten me like that. We can talk this out. It's too late for that." "I'm calling her now." Mark hung up before Emily could respond. Stunned, Emily sat there, her heart racing. She felt abandoned by her brother, and her anger toward him grew. Why did he have to put her in such a difficult position? Why couldn't he handle his problems himself? When James came home, he immediately sensed the shift in Emily's mood. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Emily shook her head, trying to hold back tears. "Mark just called. He's asking for money again, for his surgery." James leaned back, taking her hand. "What did he say?" "He said I'm selfish for not helping him. He even threatened to tell Mom." Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. James sighed deeply. "You can't let this control your life. You've made your decision. You deserve to protect your own happiness." "But he's my brother." "I don't want to seem like I don't care," Emily replied, torn between guilt and the happiness she had only recently found. "Emily, you can't save everyone. Sometimes people need to deal with the consequences of their own choices," James said gently, trying to reassure her. Emily sat in silence for a moment, processing his words. She knew there was truth in what he said, but the guilt still gnawed at her. "I feel stuck," she finally admitted, her head bowed. James pulled her into his arms, offering the warmth she needed. "We'll get through this together. Remember, our vacation is something we've dreamed of. Don't let Mark ruin it." Despite James' efforts to comfort her, Emily couldn't shake the uncertainty that weighed on her mind. She knew the conflict with Mark wouldn't end easily. Getting involved would only complicate things, and she felt trapped in an endless cycle. One thing was clear: that phone call had changed everything. Emily knew she had to decide what truly mattered to her family or her personal happiness. She could only hope that whatever choice she made wouldn't destroy both her and the people she loved. James shook his head. "But your life is important too. You can't save everyone. This isn't about being selfish, it's about taking care of your mental health. If you keep worrying about this, you'll miss out on enjoying our vacation." "I know that," Emily said, looking down at the floor, feeling a weight on her chest. "But I don't want to seem like I don't care. It all feels so complicated." James stepped closer, took Emily's hand, and pulled her into a hug. "Listen to me. I'll always support whatever you decide. But this time you have to put yourself first." Emily nodded slowly, trying to absorb James's words. She knew she deserved happiness, but guilt and responsibility towards her brother haunted her. "What if he does something reckless if I don't help?" she thought anxiously. After a moment of silence, Emily looked up. "I need to talk to Mark. Maybe he can explain everything. Maybe I can help in another way," she said, her heart pounding. James sighed, his face showing uncertainty. "If that's what you want, I'll support you. But don't let him manipulate you." In her heart, Emily knew Mark always had a way of twisting situations. He might get their mother's attention and make himself look like the victim. She felt torn between her love for her brother and her commitment to James. With determination, Emily picked up the phone and called Mark. The ringing sounded like thunder in her ears. She wanted to avoid it, but curiosity pushed her to find out what Mark would say. "I need an explanation," Emily said when Mark finally answered. Her voice was firmer than she had expected. "Emily, finally you're listening. I've told you this is serious. Don't you care at all?" Mark's voice was passionate, revealing his frustration. "I'm not saying I don't care, Mark. But I have my own life too. Why don't you find another way to get the money?" Emily asserted. "Because I have no other choice. This surgery is expensive, and I don't have insurance. I'm relying on family, and now you're leaving me in my time of need." Mark's voice was full of anger. "This isn't about leaving you. It's about taking responsibility for your choices," Emily responded, feeling her own anger rising. "I can't always be your savior. You have to stand on your own. But I can't. Don't you care? If something happens to me, it'll be your fault," Mark threatened, his voice shaking with emotion. Emily felt a deep ache in her chest. "That's not fair. I won't carry that burden," she shouted, her voice stronger than before. "I'll tell Mom if you don't help. She'll support me," Mark threatened. Hearing that, Emily felt panic creeping back. She wanted to hang up and rid herself of this burden. "You know that won't work," she replied, trying to stay calm. "Don't judge me, Emily. I'm struggling here. You may not understand what I'm facing," Mark growled, his cold voice making Emily feel trapped. I understand more than you think. And I won't let you manipulate me anymore, Emily said firmly. She hung up the phone, feeling a weight lift off her heart, even though uncertainty still loomed. James approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. Good job, honey. That was the right step, he said softly, but Emily still felt doubt. Is that enough? Emily asked, her voice weak. For now, yes. But we need to be ready for Mark's reaction. He won't stay quiet, James replied. Emily nodded, trying to prepare herself for whatever would come next. She knew this fight wasn't over, and she had to be ready for anything. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind kept spinning. What if Mark really reported her to their mother? What if he tried to ruin her relationship with James? All these questions filled her mind, but she knew one thing: she had to fight for her happiness. She prayed to find the right path. Even as the emotional storm continued to rage, she felt like she was in the middle of an inevitable battle, where she had to hold on for the happiness she had built with James. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling anxious. She felt a heavy weight on her chest, as if something was wrong in the air. James, who had woken up earlier, sat beside her, noticing her worried expression. What's wrong, honey? James asked gently, brushing Emily's messy hair. You look like you didn't get enough sleep. Emily sighed, trying to calm her anxiety. I can't stop thinking about Mark. I'm scared of what he'll do after our conversation yesterday, she replied, her voice trembling. James nodded, knowing how difficult this situation was for Emily. Remember, you've done your best. Now it's time to focus on us. Our vacation is almost here, he said, trying to soothe Emily. But Emily couldn't shake her thoughts of the worst-case scenario. She knew Mark wouldn't stay silent. She remembered his threatening words, and her anxiety grew. After breakfast, when James left for work, Emily decided not to stay idle. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Mark. We need to talk. Let's meet, she wrote, hoping to resolve this issue peacefully. Soon, Mark replied quickly. Our usual place. 5 p.m. Don't think you can avoid this, he wrote, and Emily felt her heart race. That day, time seemed to move slowly. Emily tried not to think about the upcoming meeting, but the image of Mark kept haunting her. She tried to distract herself by preparing for the vacation, but every time she saw the passports and plane tickets, her anxiety returned. When the clock struck 4 p.m., Emily's fingers trembled as she picked up the car keys. She had promised herself not to let Mark affect her life again, but fear enveloped her every step towards their meeting place. When Emily arrived at the small cafe on the corner, she saw Mark already sitting at their favorite table. He looked impatient, his eyes burning with anger. Finally, you're here, he said, his voice full of dissatisfaction. Emily took a deep breath and sat across from him. I told you we needed to talk. I don't want any drama here, Mark, she said, trying to stay calm. But this isn't drama. Emily, this is life and death, Mark's voice rose. You need to understand that I need your help. This isn't just about money, it's about my safety. And I've told you, I can't help in that way, Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. You should find other alternatives, not rely on me. Mark fell silent for a moment, his face red with anger. You're so selfish. Ignoring your family for your own happiness, he said mockingly. I'm not ignoring my family. I just won't let myself be trapped by your mistakes, Emily replied, her heart pounding. Mark suddenly changed his tone. Do you know how painful it is to feel betrayed by the person who should be supporting you? He stared at Emily sharply, his eyes full of emotion. This isn't about betrayal. It's about taking responsibility. If you keep doing this, you'll only ruin your own life, Emily replied, trying to be firm. Mark shook his head, his face showing despair. Then you don't know what will happen to me. If I don't get help, I might do something irreparable, he said, his voice full of threat. Hearing that, Emily felt pressured. What do you mean by that, Mark? You can't threaten me like this, she shouted, feeling her anger rising. But this is reality. I have no other choice. If you won't help, I'll find another way to get the money, Mark replied, his voice getting louder. And what is that? Do you think threatening me will help you? It'll only make things worse, Emily retorted, feeling frustrated. Suddenly, Mark stood up and slammed the table hard, drawing attention from people around them. You won't ignore me, Emily. This is your family, he shouted. Emily was stunned, feeling scared. She had never seen Mark this frustrated before. Mark, calm down. We can talk this out, she said, trying to de-escalate the situation. But Mark didn't listen. He turned and walked towards the exit, ignoring Emily's calls. Before leaving, he turned and said, "You'll regret taking this path. I'll make you pay for it." Emily stood still, her heart racing. She knew Mark wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. As she stepped out of the cafe, her anxiety worsened. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt uncertainty hanging over her like a dark cloud. After that tense meeting, Emily felt trapped in confusion. She realized she had to be prepared for all the possibilities that might come, especially if Mark decided to act on his threats. As she drove home, she tried to calm her mind, but fear continued to haunt her. Deep down, she knew her life would never be the same after this encounter. The day of departure finally arrived. Emily and James hurriedly prepared themselves on that cold morning. The atmosphere in their apartment was filled with excitement and nervousness. Their large suitcases were neatly packed by the door, containing clothes, cameras, and all the essentials they had prepared for weeks. Although the tension within her hadn't completely disappeared, Emily tried to calm her heart and enjoy this moment. This was her dream trip, a moment she had been anticipating for a long time. As they headed to the airport, Emily glanced out the car window, watching the city come to life with the hustle and bustle of the morning. Outside, the sky looked clear, signaling that their journey might go smoothly. However, inside her heart, there was still lingering anxiety, the shadow of her last conversation with Mark that continued to haunt her. She knew that the peace she had achieved was fragile. Upon arrival at the airport, they immediately went through security and checked in. As they waited at the gate, Emily felt James's reassuring presence beside her. He held her hand tightly, giving her strength. "We'll be okay, Em. Let's enjoy this adventure," he said softly, making her smile slightly. Soon their flight was announced. Emily and James walked towards the plane, their hearts filled with a mix of excitement and nervousness. As the plane took off, Emily closed her eyes, letting go of all her worries for a moment. She tried to focus on the sound of the plane's engine, the feeling of leaving the ground, and the prospect of beautiful days awaiting her at their destination. After hours in the air, they finally landed at their dream vacation destination. When they stepped off the plane, the warm sun greeted them, filling them with happiness. "We made it," James exclaimed, hugging Emily tightly. She laughed, feeling the tension in her heart gradually ease. She promised herself that she would enjoy every moment of this trip. As they explored the beautiful beaches, wandered through quaint streets, and savored the local cuisine, Emily felt a new energy within her. Every moment with James felt precious, and she wanted to absorb all the joy around them. However, deep down, she couldn't entirely escape the thoughts about Mark. She tried to set them aside and focus on the present, but the uncertainty of their future relationship still lingered in her mind. One evening, as they watched the sun set on the beach, Emily shared her feelings with James. "I want to enjoy this moment, but I can't stop thinking about Mark. I feel guilty," she confessed, her voice trembling. James hugged her tightly, his voice full of love. "I understand, Em. But remember, this is our time. We deserve to be happy. Don't let him take that away from us." Emily nodded, trying to let go of the burden in her heart. She looked at the horizon, seeing the sky filled with vibrant colors. She knew life would always be full of challenges, but she also realized she had the strength to face them. In that moment, she promised herself that she would fight for her happiness and cherish every precious moment she had with James. And so Emily and James continued their journey, embracing the beauty of their surroundings and finding joy in each other's company. Emily knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew she had the courage to face whatever came her way. Together with James, she felt ready to face the future, no matter what challenges awaited them. James noticed the tension in the air. "Emily," he said softly, breaking the silence between them, "you've already decided to take this journey. This is your time to enjoy what we've dreamed of together. Don't let what happened stop us from cherishing every moment." Emily looked at James and sighed deeply. "I know," she replied, her voice gentle but full of emotion. "But I still feel guilty. Mark. He needed my help, and I left him." James paused, searching for the right words. "Emily, you did your best. You can't carry everyone's burden all the time. Sometimes you have to choose yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that." Emily knew James was right, but deep inside, something still felt unresolved. As the announcement for their flight echoed through the airport, she pushed the feeling aside, at least for now. They were about to embark on this journey together, and Emily didn't want to dampen the happiness they were supposed to feel. After boarding the plane, Emily and James settled into their seats by the window. As the aircraft took off, Emily gazed out, watching the city shrink beneath them. With each passing second, they moved closer to the adventure they had long awaited. On one hand, Emily felt like she was leaving all her troubles behind, but on the other, she knew those problems would still be there when she returned. A few hours later, they arrived in Paris, the first stop on their itinerary. As they stepped out of the airport, the fresh Parisian breeze welcomed them, carrying with it a sense of freedom and excitement. Emily couldn't help but smile as she breathed in the crisp morning air, which felt different from what she was used to. The atmosphere of Paris was as romantic as she had always imagined. "We're really here," Emily whispered in awe as they descended the escalator, heading towards the taxi that would take them to their hotel. James chuckled softly, seeing the excitement start to light up her face. "Yes, we're really here." "Welcome to Paris," James replied, sharing her enthusiasm. They arrived at a cozy little hotel, right in the heart of the city. From the window of their room, they had a stunning view of Paris, with the Eiffel Tower standing tall in the distance. Emily's eyes sparkled as she stood by the window, admiring the city filled with history, art, and romance. For a few moments, she was completely lost in the beauty of the moment, forgetting all her worries and doubts. Their first evening in Paris was spent strolling along the Seine, soaking in the city's vibrant atmosphere. The city lights twinkled on the river's surface, creating a mesmerizing scene. Emily felt as if she were in a dream, and for the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. James held her hand as they sat at a small cafe, sipping coffee and watching people pass by. "This is only the beginning, Emily. There's so much more waiting for us," he said with a smile. Emily looked at James, feeling the warmth of his support and love. She knew that despite the lingering guilt, she deserved to enjoy every moment of this. Their adventure had just begun, and Emily was ready to embrace the beauty that lay ahead. In her heart, Emily knew that this trip was not only about the places they would visit, but also about rediscovering herself. She would face her inner struggles, but for now she chose to focus on the happiness right in front of her. Their first morning in Paris felt magical. The gentle sound of the Seine's waters, the footsteps of people on the streets, and the aroma of coffee wafting from nearby cafes all blended together in perfect harmony. Emily slowly opened her eyes, enjoying the sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of their hotel room. Beside her, James was still asleep, his breathing calm, offering a peacefulness that soothed her. Emily smiled slightly. This was the first day of the adventure they had planned for so long, and Paris, with all its charm, was the perfect place to start. However, as she lay there, savoring the quiet moment, her thoughts occasionally drifted back to the unresolved issues she had left behind. The phone call from Mark a few days ago still weighed on her, but she tried not to let it cloud her mind. After James woke up, they started their morning with breakfast at a nearby bistro. The warm croissants they shared, paired with a cup of strong black coffee, felt so special, as if every bite brought a taste of freedom and joy. As they sat there, Emily realized that amidst all the anxiety and uncertainty she had been feeling, there was something that reminded her that life was also full of beautiful moments meant to be celebrated. "Where do you want to go today?" James asked with a smile, pulling out a small map from his bag. Emily glanced at the map for a moment, then sighed, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "I still can't believe we're really here," she replied. "There's so much we want to see." James smiled, gently taking her hand. "We can start with the most iconic Eiffel Tower. We've dreamed about it for so long, haven't we?" Emily nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, that sounds perfect." They walked toward the Eiffel Tower, passing through gardens and cobbled streets filled with tourists. As the magnificent tower came into view, Emily felt her heart leap. Although she had seen countless pictures of the Eiffel Tower, seeing it with her own eyes was a completely different experience. The towering metal structure stood gracefully under the Parisian blue sky, and Emily was captivated by its beauty. They decided to go up to the top of the tower. The long line didn't bother them at all. When they finally reached the summit, the view of Paris stretching out below left Emily speechless. The sign snaked its way through the grand buildings. Notre Dame stood proud in the distance, and the entire city glittered under the bright sunlight. "This is incredible," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible as she was mesmerized by the view before her. James nodded, his eyes never leaving Emily. "And it's even more beautiful because I get to see it with you." James' words made Emily's heart flutter. She smiled at him, feeling warmth and happiness fill her. Up there, on the Eiffel Tower, they both felt something beyond just a beautiful view. It was a symbol of their shared journey, of their struggles and dreams coming to life. After descending from the tower, they continued to Musée d'Orsay. As an art lover, Emily was eager to see the famous works housed there. As they walked through the museum, once a train station, Emily was in awe of the grand architecture and the peaceful atmosphere. Inside, they strolled among masterpieces by great artists like Van Gogh, Monet, and Degas. But one painting caught Emily's attention more than the others: Van Gogh's Starry Night. She stood before it, captivated by the brushstrokes that depicted the swirling night sky so vividly. As she gazed at the painting, Emily felt as if it spoke directly to her, reflecting the chaos and beauty of life. "Do you like it?" James asked, standing beside her, observing Emily's reaction. Emily nodded. "It's so beautiful and moving. I feel like this painting represents how I feel right now, a bit chaotic, but there's beauty in it." James smiled and gently wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You're right. Life is full of chaos, but that's also what makes it so meaningful." After leaving the museum, they spent the rest of the afternoon walking along the Seine. Paris in the late afternoon was mesmerizing, with the sky slowly turning from bright blue to golden orange as the sun began to set. They wandered aimlessly, enjoying the peaceful and romantic ambience, while the streetlights started to glow, adding to the city's charm. As they paused for a moment by the riverbank, Emily looked at James. "Thank you for always being by my side," she said softly. James looked at her with a gaze full of love. "I'll always be here for you, Emily, no matter what." That night they enjoyed a romantic dinner at a small restaurant in Montmartre, an artsy district filled with its own unique charm. From their table they could see street artists painting and musicians filling the evening with beautiful melodies. Emily felt fully alive in that moment. All her fears and doubts were slowly fading under the magic of Paris. But as they returned to their hotel, as the night grew quieter and the calmness settled around them, Emily once again felt the familiar sense of doubt. Behind the happiness she felt, there was still the shadow of Mark and the responsibility she had left behind. Had she made the right decision? Was she being selfish? Lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, Emily sighed. This journey wasn't just about exploring new places, but also about finding a way to make peace with herself. And while she hadn't fully found the answers yet, she knew that with each passing day, each experience she shared with James, she would get closer to that peace. Paris might be the city of love, but for Emily, it was also becoming the city where she learned the importance of loving herself. That morning, Emily woke up with mixed feelings of tranquility and anticipation. The sunlight streaming through the gaps in the curtains made their room glow with warmth, and in the distance, the sounds of Paris slowly waking up could be heard. Emily turned to her side, seeing James still asleep beside her, his arm gently wrapped around her waist. There was a comforting feeling flowing through her body, reminding her how much she cherished James' presence by her side. Carefully, she moved her fingers across James' chest, savoring the simple intimacy they shared. For Emily, their relationship was not just about the physical aspect, it was something deeper, more emotional. They had been through a lot together. And now, in this city of love, their bond felt stronger than ever. James began to stir slowly, his eyes opening little by little. A faint smile formed on his face as he realized Emily was watching him. "Morning," he whispered in his characteristically hoarse morning voice. Emily smiled, replying softly. "Morning." Her hand still moved slowly over his skin, feeling his steady heartbeat. Without a word, James pulled Emily closer. His touch was gentle but meaningful, and Emily could feel the warmth between them start to ignite. The intimacy they shared was always deep, but this morning there was something more special, perhaps because the atmosphere of Paris made everything feel so romantic. Gently, James leaned down and kissed Emily's lips. The kiss was filled with love, slow yet profound. Emily returned it with the same passion, her body drawing closer to James, feeling the growing warmth that enveloped them both. Each kiss, each touch was filled with a mixture of pure desire and love. The soft sound of sheets rustling became the background as they moved together, their bodies perfectly in sync. There was no rush. Everything about this moment was about savoring their togetherness. James' hands gently explored Emily's body, while Emily felt all the tension and burdens of the past few weeks slowly fade with each touch. They made love with gentleness and slowness, as if wanting to ensure that every movement, every breath, was filled with the desire to be fully present for each other. Emily could feel James' love in every touch, in every kiss they shared. As they reached the peak of their intimacy, it was as if the outside world disappeared, leaving only the two of them in a private moment full of beauty. After it was all over, they lay in each other's arms, their breaths slowly returning to normal. Emily smiled softly, feeling calm and filled with love. This relationship, this moment, was more than just physical. It was a testament to the strength of their bond, and Emily felt deeply grateful to have James by her side. They stayed wrapped in each other's arms for a while, enjoying the warmth of each other's bodies, until James finally broke the comfortable silence. "Paris really suits us, doesn't it?" he murmured, gently stroking Emily's hair. Emily smiled, resting her head on James' chest. "Yes, it really does. It feels like we can finally truly enjoy our time together. No distractions, no stress, just us." James kissed the top of her head, full of affection. Just as it should be. They both fell silent again, still wrapped in the tangled sheets, feeling a rare peace. Emily closed her eyes, letting the feeling of gratitude fill her. There was something magical about this city, about being here with James. Everything felt lighter, freer. Although she knew they still had challenges to face when they returned home, for now, Emily allowed herself to bask in this happiness, this love, and the freedom that came with it. A moment later, James rolled onto his side, facing Emily with a playful smile. "How about we continue our adventure in Paris today? There are a lot of places we need to see." Emily chuckled, looking at his enthusiastic face. "Sure. But maybe we could start with breakfast first. I'm really hungry." James nodded in agreement, his eyes still filled with love as he looked at Emily. "Agreed. Breakfast first, then we can explore more. And don't forget, there's a cafe that's famous for its croissants. We have to try them." With excitement, they finally got out of bed, eager to explore a new day in this city of love. But deep down, they both knew that even though Paris offered its charms, the greatest magic was still the intimacy and relationship they had with each other. After finishing breakfast at a cozy little cafe, Emily and James stepped out into the busy streets of Paris. The sound of their footsteps on the cobblestone streets mixed with the lively noise of the city. In the distance, a street musician played a beautiful melody on an accordion, adding a romantic touch to the morning. The air was cool and calming, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of freshly baked pastries from a nearby bakery. They walked leisurely, savoring each moment without any rush. Emily looked around, captivated by the historic buildings they passed. The old structures, with their large windows, flower-filled balconies, and intricate architectural details, made her feel like she was walking through a storybook. This was Paris, the city she had always dreamed of visiting, and now, strolling its streets with James, it felt like a dream come true. Beside her, James seemed equally happy. His eyes sparkled as he talked about the history of Paris, telling Emily fascinating stories about the famous buildings. Every time he spoke, his enthusiasm shone through, making Emily fall even more in love with him. He wasn't just romantic, he had a way of making her laugh with the little jokes he slipped in here and there. When they reached a small park filled with red and white roses, Emily paused to take a deep breath and soak in the atmosphere. In the center of the park stood a small fountain with an angel statue, the water glistening under the sunlight. They sat on a wooden bench, enjoying the peaceful moment together. Other couples were also walking around hand in hand, adding to the romantic vibe of the park. "We could take the metro, it would be faster," Emily said with a soft smile, still admiring the view around her. "But isn't this more beautiful?" "We get to enjoy every second," James replied, his smile gentle as he squeezed her hand a little tighter. "This is Paris. We have to soak it all in." Soon after, they continued walking, and the Eiffel Tower started to come into view in the distance. The iconic iron structure stood tall against the clear blue sky. Emily stopped for a moment, her heart swelling with awe. The tower was magnificent, much larger and more impressive than she had imagined. The whole experience felt surreal, like they were living in a romantic movie together. When they finally reached the base of the Eiffel Tower, Emily gazed up at it in silence, her eyes filling with tears of happiness. James wrapped his arm around her, watching her face light up with pure joy. "It's even more than I imagined," Emily whispered, her voice filled with wonder. James smiled and kissed her forehead softly. "I knew you'd love it." They bought tickets to go up the tower, and the elevator slowly ascended, giving them a panoramic view of the city below. As they rose higher, Paris stretched out beneath them, the Seine River winding through the city like a ribbon. In the distance, iconic landmarks like Notre Dame Cathedral and the Louvre Museum came into view, reminding Emily of the rich history and art the city held. At the top of the Eiffel Tower, Emily was completely mesmerized. The view was breathtaking, as if they could see the whole world from up there. A gentle breeze blew, making her hair flutter, and the atmosphere around them felt magical. It was the perfect moment, and Emily felt so lucky to be sharing it with James. Without warning, James suddenly knelt down in front of her, right in the middle of the crowd of tourists who were also enjoying the view. Emily gasped, her eyes widening and her heart racing as she realized what was happening. In his hand, James held a small black box, his familiar gentle smile spreading across his face. "Emily, you are the light of my life," James said, his voice deep and filled with emotion. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Every moment with you makes my life more meaningful, and I can't imagine my future without you by my side. Will you marry me?" The world around them seemed to pause. The other tourists nearby fell silent, watching the romantic scene unfold with smiles on their faces. Emily's eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed with happiness. Her heart felt warm, and without hesitation she nodded, her smile growing wider as tears spilled over. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely a whisper because of the powerful emotions she felt. "Yes, I will marry you." James stood up and immediately pulled her into a tight hug, lifting her slightly off the ground as if he never wanted to let her go. Cheers and claps erupted from the people around them, some even applauding, celebrating the beautiful moment with them. At the top of the Eiffel Tower, with all of Paris as their backdrop, Emily and James created a memory they would cherish for the rest of their lives. As they stood there embracing, James slid a delicate ring onto Emily's finger, and their smiles never left their faces. After enjoying unforgettable moments in Paris, Emily and James prepared to return to the United States. That morning they packed with hearts full of cherished memories. Although their vacation in Europe had come to an end, the happiness and love they felt lingered fresh in their minds. On the plane, Emily gazed at the vast blue sky, recalling every second of their journey. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she said, looking at James with a wide smile. "Paris was the perfect place for us to celebrate our love." James nodded in agreement and squeezed Emily's hand. "We have to come back here someday," he said confidently. "There are so many places we want to explore together." Once they arrived home, they were greeted with warmth and longing. Family and friends couldn't wait to hear all the stories from their vacation. As they recounted their experiences in Paris, the sparkle in Emily and James's eyes revealed just how much they enjoyed every moment. A few weeks later, as their lives returned to everyday routines, Emily began to feel a significant change happening in her life. She started experiencing morning sickness and unusual fatigue. With a mix of curiosity and anxiety, Emily decided to take a pregnancy test. When the results showed 2 red lines, her feelings were a blend of happiness and unease. That evening, as James returned home from work, Emily prepared a special atmosphere in their home. With candles lit and a simple yet heartfelt dinner, Emily gathered her courage to share the big news. "James, I have something important to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "What is it, darling?" James looked at her with keen interest. Taking a deep breath, Emily said, "I'm pregnant." James's eyes widened, and his face instantly lit up with joy. "We're going to have a baby. This is the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me," he exclaimed, hugging Emily tightly. They took time to celebrate this happy moment, discussing their future and potential names for their baby. Each passing day, Emily began to feel gentle kicks from within her belly, and James lovingly placed his hand there, feeling those little movements. As they prepared to welcome a new member to their family, James became more involved. He helped Emily shop for baby supplies and attended prenatal classes with her. Their togetherness strengthened the love that had already blossomed. With James by her side, Emily felt her confidence growing. Every challenge they faced became lighter because they supported each other. Their happiness was not only for themselves but also for the baby growing inside Emily. As time went on, they celebrated every small milestone in this journey, from hearing the baby's heartbeat to planning a future filled with love. Looking ahead, one thing was certain: they were ready to embark on life as a family, filled with hope and love, eagerly awaiting the new story they would write together.